A small room, a television nobody's watching, a plastic cup with a number on the side, and about 20 minutes. Then a man walks out to the front desk and collects $100. It looks like the cleanest deal in medicine. He's paid for something his body makes for free. A family that couldn't have a child gets one. Here's the problem. What he made in that room this morning will sell for $4,000 to $5,000. And that gap isn't a markup. A sperm bank isn't buying sperm, it's buying a man, and it only works if it can sell him 1,000 times. Start with what's actually for sale, because it isn't what most people picture. You don't buy sperm by the milliliter. You buy a vial, 0.5 milliliter of frozen fluid, sold with a guarantee attached to it. Most banks promise something like 10 million motile sperm cells in that vial. Not 10 million cells. 10 million cells that still swim after being frozen and thawed. The price is public. California Cryobank lists prepared vials from around $1,195 up to $2,195. Seattle Sperm Bank sits near $1,395. Fairfax, around $1,895. Add storage. A year of it runs about $500. Add shipping, in a nitrogen tank, overnight. And one vial is one attempt. That's it. One vial, one try, and the national average is 3 to 4 cycles before a pregnancy sticks. So the customer isn't buying a product. She's buying a lottery ticket that costs about the same as a used car by the time she's done. Globally, this is a market worth somewhere around $6 billion. Which raises the obvious question. The raw material is free. The customer pays thousands. So where is all that money actually going? Not into the cup. Start at the bottom of the ladder with the only cost everybody knows about, the donor. $70 to $150 a donation, once to 3 times a week, with a mandatory 48 to 72-hour gap in between. Call it $800 to $1,500 a month for an active donor. Real money to a college student. Rounding error to a bank selling vials at $2,000. Climb one rung. Before that man is allowed near the collection room, he has to survive the screening. And the screening is brutal in a way almost nobody outside the industry understands. California Cryobank says under 1% of applicants make it into the portfolio. Seattle Sperm Bank says the same. That's marketing, so researchers went and checked. A study tracked more than 11,700 men who applied to Cryos International, one of the largest banks on Earth. Nearly 55% were lost during recruitment, withdrew, ghosted, stopped showing up. 17% were rejected on medical grounds. 12% failed the lifestyle questionnaire. Another 11% failed on sperm quality. Only 3.8% made it all the way through to having samples released for use. Picture that in the waiting room. For every face that ends up in the catalog, 25 men sat in those chairs, filled out the forms, gave the sample, and got the email that said no. Every one of those 25 cost money. Staff time, a lab test, a semen analysis. All of it spent on inventory that never existed. Now the rung almost nobody budgets for correctly. Time. Because passing the screening doesn't get you a sellable vial. Every specimen is quarantined for 6 months, and the donor is retested for HIV, hepatitis B and C, syphilis, chlamydia, and gonorrhea before anything is released. On top of that, donors typically stay active in the program for 6 to 12 months. From application to full payout is usually 7 to 12 months. 6 months in a freezer, a year in the program, then potentially a decade on the shelf waiting for a buyer. So here's where you are. You've screened a few hundred men to find one. You've paid him weekly for a year. You've run infectious disease panels twice. You're holding liquid nitrogen at minus 196 degrees the entire time. And you still haven't sold a single vial. There's also a number this entire industry quietly runs on. It's not on any price list. Hold on to that. Here's the thing about all those costs. Look at what they have in common. Screening, recruitment, genetic panels, quarantine, retesting. Every single one of them is spent per donor, not per vial, which means the moment a man clears quarantine, the economics flip completely. One session produces around 4 to 5 vials on average, sometimes 1, sometimes 10, depending on the count. A donor giving twice a week for a year is roughly 100 sessions. Do the arithmetic, and a single approved donor can generate hundreds of vials. In some cases, far more. One woman who grew up donor conceived, and who now knows of 37 biological half-siblings, later found that her donor had produced approximately 1,700 vials. 1,700. From one man. At roughly $1,000 a vial, that's over $1.5 million of sellable inventory generated by someone who was paid, at most, a few thousand for the year. Read that again. Because now the paradox isn't a clever line, it's just the balance sheet. The expensive part of a sperm bank is finding a man. The cheap part is selling him. And once you've paid the enormous fixed cost of qualifying one donor, every additional vial from that same man is almost pure margin, while every new donor means starting the whole screening funnel from zero. So the business isn't built to find more men, it's built to sell more of the men it already has. And that is the disturbing part. Not fraud, not a scandal, the machine working exactly as designed. Every vial that makes the model more profitable is also, potentially, one more child, which means the single most profitable action available to a sperm bank, sell more of your best donor, is the exact action that creates 100 half-siblings who don't know each other exist. Profit and restraint point in opposite directions, structurally, permanently. Now watch what happens when you remember what the customer is actually paying for. She can't inspect the product. She can't test it. All she has is the profile, the height, the eye color, the degree, the medical history, the childhood photo. The information is the product. In the mid-2000s, 2 women chose donor 9623 from the Zytex catalog. IQ of 160, multiple degrees in neuroscience, clean health history. They were told he was among the bank's best, and that demand for him was so high he was rarely available. 7 years after the birth of their son, Zytex accidentally included the donor's real name in a batch of emails. The families Googled him. According to the lawsuits that followed, he was a college dropout with a felony conviction who had been diagnosed with schizophrenia in 2002. His sperm had been used to create at least 36 children across the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. In 2020, the Georgia Supreme Court ruled that families could sue sperm banks for consumer fraud over misrepresented donor backgrounds. Zytex has disputed the allegations, saying the case was dismissed early and that it's confident in the actual evidence. But look at the mechanic underneath. The biology wasn't the failure. The vials were fine. What failed was the only part of the product nobody had verified, the story on the page. As one Zytex representative had put it years earlier, if a donor says his aunt died of a heart attack, they take him at his word. And because the entire model runs on amortizing one man across as many families as possible, one unverified profile isn't one bad sale, it's 36 of them. So that settles it. Verify the paperwork, run a background check, and the system's fixed. Not quite. Remember the number I told you to hold on to. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine suggests that in a population of 800,000, a single donor should be limited to no more than 25 births. That's the closest thing America has to a national cap. It's a suggestion. There is no federal law setting a maximum number of offspring per donor. And do the division. The U.S. population is over 340 million. Run that guideline across the whole country, and it permits something on the order of 10,000 children from one donor. Most reputable banks set their own, tighter cap, usually 25 families. Fine. Except here's how the cap actually gets enforced. A donor is generally retired once 25 families report a birth. Reporting is optional. Advocates estimate only about 20 to 40% of families ever do it. The ceiling is real. The ruler measuring it is broken by design. Now the clean model. Say qualifying one donor, screening hundreds of applicants, 12 months of payments, 2 rounds of infectious disease panels, 6 months of cryogenic holding, lands somewhere in the tens of thousands of dollars. Divide that by roughly $1,000 of margin per vial. You break even somewhere in the low dozens of vials. Everything past that is profit. And a productive donor doesn't make dozens of vials, he makes hundreds. So does the model hold? The optimistic version? It's already ending. Cheap consumer DNA testing has made anonymity effectively impossible. Donor-conceived people find each other whether the bank cooperates or not. And in 2022, Colorado became the first state to ban anonymous donation outright, effective January 2025, with a hard cap on families per donor. Donors must be 21. Records must be kept. The realistic version is less tidy. By March 2025, Colorado lawmakers were already debating House Bill 1259, a partial rollback of those transparency rules. The argument for it? If you take away anonymity, men stop donating, and people go find donors on Craigslist instead. And that's the trap the whole industry sits in. Every rule that protects the child makes the donor rarer. And the rarer the donor, the harder the math pushes to sell him more times. You still walk past a clinic and see a man paid $100 for 20 minutes of his morning. What you don't see is the ledger behind him. The one where he was never the cost. He was the inventory. If you want the version of this story where the product isn't cells but eggs, and where the costs land on a woman's body instead of a spreadsheet, watch the egg donation video next. Same math, much higher stakes. And subscribe if you want the hidden economics behind the industries nobody explains out loud.